Elijah Brooks had done everything right, top of his class. A portfolio that could rival seasoned pros. Apps he'd built from scratch, not for show, but for real users, for real people. He wasn't just smart, he was relentless, resourceful, humble. And he had one goal in mind: break into the tech world and build something that mattered. So when he got the interview request from Orion Systems, one of the biggest tech firms in the city, he thought, this is it. This could be the start of everything. He wore his best suit, tied the tie his father had given him back in college, printed out 3 crisp copies of his resume, just in case. And when he walked into that glass building, badge clipped, shoulders square, laptop bag at his side, he felt it, that mix of nerves and hope, that fire in your chest when you know you got something to prove, not just to them, but to yourself. He checked in at the front desk, sat in the waiting area, watched employees walk by, lattes in hand, sneakers squeaking on polished floors. Then a door opened. A man in a fitted blazer stepped out, slicked back hair, polished watch, smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Elijah?" the man said. Elijah stood. "Yes, sir. Great. I'm Richard, Senior Hiring Manager for Orion. Let's chat." The interview room was cold, modern, minimalist, intimidating by design. Elijah sat down across from Richard, laid his resume gently on the table. Richard glanced at it. Then, just for a second, he looked Elijah up and down. The pause wasn't long, but it said everything. "Tell me a bit about yourself," Richard said, folding his arms. And Elijah did. He talked about how he built his first app in high school, how he taught himself Python and JavaScript online, how he managed a remote team of 3 during college to develop a budgeting tool for students. He talked with passion, precision. "Purpose," Richard nodded politely. But his eyes were glazing over, and Elijah saw it. He knew that look. It was the look that says, "I've already made up my mind." 20 minutes later, the interview ended. No follow-up questions, no enthusiasm, no interest, just a handshake. "Thanks for coming in," Richard said, forcing a thin smile. "We'll be in touch." Elijah smiled back. But inside, he already knew. He packed his bag, walked past the clean desks, the open meeting pods, the walls lined with whiteboards and buzzwords. Past the receptionist. Past the coffee bar, out the revolving door, into the city air. And as he stood there, on the sidewalk, resume still crisp in his hand, he let out a breath. Not of disappointment, of clarity. He had sat in that room. He had brought his best. And still, it hadn't been enough. Not because of his skills, not because of his answers, but because when Richard saw him, he didn't see potential. He saw a risk, an outsider, someone who didn't fit the mold. And that was something Elijah had seen far too many times. That night, Elijah sat at his desk. No lights on, just the blue glow of his screen. He didn't cry. He didn't rant. He built. Opened a blank document, typed the first lines of code. Because if a door won't open for you, you build your own, and someday, they'll wish they let you in. The rejection email came 2 days later. Subject line: "Thank you for your interest." Elijah didn't even have to open it. He already knew what it said. Still, he clicked. "While we were impressed with your background, we've decided to move forward with other candidates who more closely align with our current needs. We encourage you to apply again in the future." Generic, polite, empty. Elijah stared at the screen for a long moment. Not angry, not surprised, just done. He closed the laptop, let his hands rest on the keyboard for a few seconds, then leaned back in his chair. This wasn't the first time, wouldn't be the last. Different companies, same language, same look. In the interview room. Same invisible wall. He had the talent. He had the drive. What he didn't have was permission. And suddenly he realized something. He was tired of asking for it. That night, Elijah didn't sleep. He stayed up sketching, planning, digging through code he had written over the past year. There was one project he'd shelved months ago. A productivity platform, part calendar, part AI assistant. It used machine learning to track work habits and reduce burnout for remote teams. He called it Pulse. No funding, no team, just him. And the idea. But it was good. He knew it was good. And maybe it was time to stop waiting for someone else to believe in him. Maybe it was time to build it anyway. Not for them, for everyone like him. Over the next few weeks, Elijah went dark. No more job applications. No more interviews. No more dressing up to prove he was worth a seat at someone else's table. Instead, he built his own table. Every day he coded from 6 a.m. to midnight. Sometimes longer. He ate noodles, drank coffee, missed calls from friends. He posted in online dev forums, got feedback, fixed bugs, pushed updates. Eventually, 2 other developers reached out. Lena, a UX designer from Toronto. Miguel, a back-end specialist from Brazil. Both had been passed over too. Both were tired of being overlooked. They didn't ask Elijah for equity, didn't ask for a salary. They just said, "We believe in this." And now, Elijah wasn't alone. 6 months later, Pulse had a working beta, clunky, buggy. But it worked, and a handful of users started to notice. A few remote teams. A non-profit in Portland, a startup founder in Sweden. They weren't big names, but they were real people using a real tool, made by people who had been told no too many times. Elijah watched their numbers slowly tick up. Watched users send thank you emails. Watched feedback pour in from places he'd never imagined reaching. And with every line of code, every download, every word of praise, he felt something shift. Not outside him, inside. The rejection no longer hurt, because it wasn't about being accepted anymore. It was about being undeniable. One night, as he looked over his dashboard, 2,300 users, 94% retention rate, 5-star reviews, he got a message from Lena. "We should think bigger. What if we raise seed funding? Pitch Pulse to real investors?" Elijah paused. He wasn't used to dreaming that far. But maybe now was the time. He replied, "Let's do it." And just like that, the kid who once sat in a cold office being silently judged by a man who didn't believe in him was about to build something so big, even that man couldn't ignore it. The decision to raise money wasn't made lightly. Elijah knew what came with it. Pitch decks, demo days, polished smiles, and once again, sitting in front of people who would decide if he was worth it. But this time, he wasn't chasing validation. He was chasing scaling. Pulse was real, working, growing, but it needed infrastructure, marketing, servers that wouldn't crash when 5,000 users logged in at once. So they got to work. Lena designed a beautiful pitch deck. Miguel built a live demo so smooth it felt like magic. And Elijah? He rehearsed every word of his pitch. He practiced in front of mirrors, recorded himself, studied the flow, the pauses, the punchlines. By the time he stepped into his first Zoom pitch meeting with a VC fund from San Francisco, he was calm, collected. Ready, but the investors weren't. 5 minutes in, one of them leaned back and asked, "What's your exit strategy?" Another said, "This is interesting, but don't you think the market is already saturated?" And a third, smiling too wide, added, "Have you considered bringing in someone more experienced to lead the pitch?" Elijah blinked. He was the founder, the builder, the product designer, the one who had kept the servers alive at 3 a.m. But what they saw was a young black man in a hoodie, not in a Patagonia vest, not with a Stanford degree, just him. Same story, different room. That night, He sat in silence on the floor of his apartment. Laptop open. Inbox filled with, "Thanks, but we'll pass. Miguel," called in. So did Lena. They were disappointed. Frustrated. But Elijah, he wasn't shaken. Not this time. Because he wasn't the version of himself who'd walked out of Richard's interview room months ago. This Elijah didn't break when the world said no. He pivoted, and the next day he pitched again, and again, and again. 10 meetings, 20, 35, each one a learning experience, each no sharpening his story, until one day a seed stage fund in New York said yes. Not a big yes, but enough, $250,000. A runway, a lifeline. They believed in Pulse, believed in him, and just like that. Elijah was no longer bootstrapping, he was building a company. Over the next 6 months, everything changed. They moved into a small co-working space, brought on 2 new hires, launched a mobile app version, and Pulse hit 10,000 users. One of their clients? A healthcare startup with 500 employees. Another? A university in the UK. Word was spreading, and Elijah, the kid no one would take a meeting with, was now getting featured in blogs. Black founder reinvents remote productivity. Pulse is the tool startups didn't know they needed. He didn't chase the press. He chased the product, but the press? It found him anyway. Then came the call from a recruiter, a corporate one. "Hi, I'm reaching out on behalf of Orion Systems," she said. "We're looking to explore new tools for our engineering teams, and we've heard of Pulse." Elijah froze. Orion, the same company, the same building, the same system that once told him, silently, coldly, "You don't fit here." And now, they wanted his product. He smiled quietly. "Sure," he said. "Let's set up a meeting," and in that moment, he realized something. He no longer needed to get inside their building, because now they were coming to him. The meeting with Orion Systems was scheduled for Tuesday, 2 p.m. Their team had requested a product demo, nothing formal, just a few stakeholders, a live walkthrough, a chance to evaluate fit. Elijah knew what that really meant. They were considering Pulse, which meant they were considering him. He arrived at the video call 10 minutes early, checked his lighting, tested the screen share, took a deep breath. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. The Zoom waiting room popped up. Then, ding. Orion Systems, external. Strategy call. Admit all. One by one, faces filled the screen. Project managers, procurement staff, an IT director. Then, the last square loaded, and Elijah froze for half a second. It was him, Richard. Hair slightly grayer now, no blazer this time. Just a company hoodie and the look of someone who'd been through a rough quarter. But it was him. The same Richard who had glanced at Elijah's resume, looked him up and down, and decided, without saying it, not a fit. Now? He sat too, rose down on the org chart. No fancy title, just another attendee. Elijah didn't flinch, didn't react, he just smiled. "Hi, everyone," he began, voice steady. "I'm Elijah Brooks, founder and CEO of Pulse. Thanks for joining today." The demo began. He walked them through features, how Pulse predicted burnout patterns, how it integrated with Slack, Zoom, and project boards seamlessly, how it saved teams hundreds of hours by eliminating unnecessary meetings. The Orion team nodded, impressed. Even Richard, he was the quietest in the room, but his eyes locked in. At one point, he leaned forward and asked a question about cross-department. "Analytics," Elijah answered clearly, smoothly, professionally. He didn't blink, didn't gloat, just led. Because now, he wasn't the one being interviewed, he was the one setting the table. And Richard, he was just hoping to be invited to sit down. After the call, Lena messaged Elijah. "Was that the guy?" Elijah responded, "Yep." Lena paused, then wrote, "Do you want to say something?" Elijah thought for a moment, looked out his window at the city skyline, then typed, "Not yet. Let's see where this goes." 2 weeks later, Orion Systems officially reached out. They wanted to license Pulse for their entire dev division. 500 users, a 6-month pilot contract. The number they offered? Mid-6 figures. Elijah stared at the proposal. The same company that once didn't think he belonged now wanted to integrate his tool into the heart of their operations. But it got better. In the email thread, CC'd at the bottom, was Richard's name. "We're excited to move forward with Pulse. Richard will coordinate onboarding with your team directly." Elijah leaned back in his chair, smiled. A slow, quiet, earned smile. He clicked, "Reply. Happy to move. I'll forward. Looking forward to working with Richard again. Let's set up a kickoff call next week. I'll be leading it. Send." That night, Elijah sat on his balcony, phone face down, air cool, skyscrapers glowing all around him. He didn't feel spite, didn't feel revenge. What he felt was peace. Because this was better than proving someone wrong. This was proving himself right. The onboarding kickoff was set for 10 a.m. Another video call. Another rectangle screen. But this time, it felt different. Elijah wasn't just presenting software. He was the face of the future. To the very man who once dismissed him as part of the past. The call began. Introductions were made. Elijah walked the Orion team through the integration timeline, account migration steps, and internal usage policies. Professional, polished, unshakably, composed. Richard mostly stayed quiet, taking notes, listening. But Elijah could feel it, that tension, that unspoken history hanging in the space between them. Then, near the end of the call, one project manager dropped off early, then another, until finally, only 2 faces remained, Elijah and Richard. There was a beat of silence. Then Richard spoke first. "Hey," he said, soft, careful. "Do you have a few more minutes?" Elijah paused, then nodded. "Sure." Richard exhaled. He looked down for a second, then met Elijah's eyes through the screen. "I've been meaning to say this. Since the first call," he began. "You probably remember interviewing with us at Orion last year." Elijah didn't flinch. "I do," he said. "Simply." Richard nodded slowly. "I figured." He looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Hands folded tight, voice quieter. "You were one of the strongest candidates we had," Richard said. "I just didn't see it then. And I think I know why." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Why is that?" he asked. Calm, controlled. Richard hesitated, swallowed hard. "Because I was looking for someone who looked like me, talked like me, came from where I came from, and I didn't realize how deep that bias ran. Until I saw you leading this company." Elijah didn't respond. He let the moment hang. Let Richard feel it. Richard continued, voice tight. "I was wrong, and I don't expect forgiveness or anything like that. I needed you to know I see it now." Another pause. Elijah leaned slightly forward. "Not in anger, not in judgment, just presence." "Let me ask you something," he said. Richard nodded, waiting. "Would you have said any of this if I had failed?" Silence. A long one. Richard finally shook his head. "Probably not." Elijah nodded, slowly. "I figured." But then, his tone softened. "Just slightly. I appreciate you saying it anyway. Most people never do." He let the weight lift just a bit, not out of pity, but out of power. I didn't build Pulse to prove you wrong, Elijah said. I built it to prove myself right. Richard looked down, and for the first time, he looked small, not humiliated, not crushed, just human. Well, it's a hell of a product, he said, almost whispering. You're leading something really important. Elijah smiled, not cold, not smug, just centered. Thanks, he said. And now you get to help make it better. Another pause. Then Elijah added, Welcome to the team, Richard. That afternoon, Lena messaged Elijah. How'd it go? Did he say anything? Elijah typed back, Yeah, he said everything he should have said the first time, then added, But this time I wasn't waiting for it. Richard's first day at Pulse wasn't flashy. There was no red carpet, no onboarding swag box, no warm welcome party, just a Slack login, a Notion guide, and a simple message from Elijah. Let me know if you get stuck. E. Richard. Sat at his home desk, staring at his monitor. This was different. At Orion, he used to walk into meetings 15 minutes late and still lead the room. Now, he was just another contributor. And Elijah? He was the boss, young, focused, decisive. But never arrogant. Elijah didn't micromanage. He didn't flaunt his title. He just delivered and expected others to do the same. At first, Richard struggled, not with the tasks, but with the culture. He was used to being heard before he spoke, used to being given the benefit of the doubt, used to calling the shots. Now, he had to earn it, and that was new, very new. One morning, during a product feedback meeting, Richard made a suggestion. Maybe we should drop the AI dashboard for non-premium users. It's expensive, and most of them probably won't understand how to use it anyway. The room went silent. Elijah didn't say anything right away, but his eyes locked onto Richard, steady, unblinking. Let me be clear about something, Elijah said calmly, but clearly. In this company, we never assume what people will or won't understand, especially based on where they come from or what plan they pay for. He paused. Pulse was built for the underdog, for the teams that got left out of the software conversation. If they don't understand it yet, we teach them. We design better. We never dumb it down. Richard nodded slowly. I understand. And, for the first time, he meant it. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. Richard listened more, asked more questions, gave credit instead of taking it. He stopped trying to lead and started learning. Elijah noticed. So did the team. Lena even messaged Elijah privately one day. He's changing. It's weird, but kind of cool. Elijah replied, Sometimes people don't evolve until they're forced to follow. Then came a turning point. Pulse had just closed a deal with a major educational platform, one that would bring the product into 800-plus classrooms across the U.S. But the onboarding process? A nightmare. The client's legacy system didn't sync well. Data was fragmented. The whole thing risked collapsing, and the client was this close to walking away. That night, at 11:42 p.m., Elijah's phone buzzed. It was Richard. Hey, I think I found a workaround. I wrote up a middleware patch and ran a test. We could stabilize the sync by morning. Elijah blinked. You did that tonight? He asked. Richard nodded on the other end of the call. I used to delegate this kind of stuff, but I figured maybe it's time I put in the work. Elijah smiled. Send me the code. Let's deploy it together. And they did, side by side. No ego, just the mission. By sunrise, the sync was live. The client was thrilled, the contract held, and Pulse hit its biggest milestone yet. And Richard? He didn't ask for recognition, but Elijah gave it anyway, in front of the whole team. This success? It wouldn't have happened without Richard. He showed up, rolled up his sleeves, and reminded us that it's never too late to grow. The Zoom room lit up with emojis. Richard leaned back in his chair. He wasn't used to applause for humility, but he liked how it felt. It felt real. That night, Elijah wrote something in his journal, a habit he'd picked up over the years. Leadership isn't just about who gives orders. It's about who owns their past and still shows up for the future. 3 weeks later, an email hit Elijah's inbox. Subject line, Keynote Invitation, Future of Work Conference 2025. He blinked, then read it again. They wanted him to speak, not on a panel, not in a breakout room. The opening keynote, the biggest tech conference on the East Coast. Thousands of founders, journalists, investors, decision-makers. And this time, he wasn't attending to network. He was the reason people would show up early. The first voice they'd hear. Elijah closed his laptop slowly, then leaned back and laughed, not loudly, but fully. It wasn't about validation. It was about the journey. The boy who couldn't get an entry-level job was now being handed the mic in front of an entire industry. And the best part, he knew exactly what he was going to say. The week of the event, Elijah traveled with 2 people, Lena, now head of product, and Richard, who had asked to come, not as a speaker, but as support. "I just want to listen," he said. "Want to learn." Elijah nodded. "Then you're coming for the right reasons." They boarded the same plane, stayed in the same hotel, wore matching pulse jackets with subtle logos on the sleeve. When they arrived at the convention center, it was massive. A glass fortress humming with energy. Billboards, LED panels, security lines, and Elijah's face on a banner overhead. Opening keynote, Elijah Brooks, founder and CEO, Pulse. Richard looked up at the banner, then looked at Elijah. "You ever imagine this moment?" Elijah smiled. "Not like this, but yeah, I imagined being heard." The backstage was quiet, dimly lit, all nerves and pacing and clipboard people. A young assistant with a headset walked over. "Mr. Brooks, we're ready in 2. Elijah stood, adjusted his mic, took one last breath. Lena gave him a quick fist bump. Richard gave him a nod. The respectful kind. The real kind. Then Elijah stepped through the curtain and into the light. The stage was enormous, spotlights bright, crowd packed, but Elijah didn't flinch. He stepped up to the podium, looked out over the audience, and began. "A few years ago, I walked into a company that made me feel small. I had the credentials, had the ideas, I had the drive, but what I didn't have was permission. Permission to lead, to speak, to belong." He paused, let the silence work for him. "So I stopped asking for permission, and I started building. Not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove myself right." The audience was silent. No phones, no coughs, just breath held in every corner of the room. Pulse was never about software. It was about people, about what happens when those on the outside finally get the tools to build from the inside. He looked directly into the camera now, the one broadcasting to 40,000 virtual attendees. You don't have to look like power to have it. You don't have to sound like authority to speak the truth. And you don't have to wait for someone to give you your moment, when you can build it yourself. He paused again. Let that final line land, then finished. "My name is Elijah Brooks. I was once rejected for not fitting the mold. Today, I'm here to reshape it." Applause. First soft, then rising. Then thunder. The crowd stood. People wiped their eyes, cheered, clapped like they'd just witnessed something that would stay with them. Because they had. Backstage, Richard stood near the curtain, watching, hands in his pockets. When Elijah returned, sweaty and smiling, Richard didn't say much, just held out a hand. Elijah shook it. Firm, equal. Then Richard said quietly, "You didn't just change your story, you changed mine." "And Elijah?" He nodded, not out of pride, but because He knew that's exactly what leadership is supposed to do. After the keynote, Elijah's world changed fast. His inbox exploded. TechCrunch, Wired, Forbes. Everyone wanted a quote, a podcast, a soundbite. Investors offered meetings. Schools requested guest lectures. Founders called him the blueprint for the first time in his life. He wasn't chasing opportunities. They were chasing him. But with all the spotlight, all the noise, came the silence that crept in late at night. That voice inside, not the one that doubted, the one that questioned. Now that you've made it here, what are you going to do with it? Because Elijah had climbed, but he could still remember what it felt like to stare up at the wall, knowing no one on the other side even saw him trying. He wouldn't forget that, and he couldn't ignore the messages flooding his inbox now. Not the press ones, the others, the real ones. I'm 22, black, self-taught. I've applied to 97 jobs and haven't heard back once. How did you keep going? I built a platform. No one will fund me. No one will even listen. What did you do when no one cared? How do you handle the feeling that maybe you're just not meant for it? Elijah read every message, every line, every story, and something inside him stirred. He realized this wasn't just about pulse anymore. This was about building ladders, not just platforms. So Elijah made a decision. He blocked off an entire month in his calendar, paused investor meetings, delayed expansion roadmaps, and instead, he launched something new, a program. Access. A no-equity, no-fee incubator for underestimated builders, self-taught coders, moms building apps after bedtime, first-gen founders with fire and no funding. It wouldn't be about flashy pitches. It would be about real rooms, safe rooms, rooms that listened when no one else would. He funded it himself, hired Lena to lead curriculum, and asked Richard, yes, Richard, to mentor one of the new teams. Me? Richard asked, surprised. You've seen both sides now, Elijah said. That's exactly who they need. The first Access cohort launched 3 months later. 10 builders, 10 stories. One belief, that rejection isn't the end. It's the beginning of something bigger. One woman, 40, building a fintech tool for single parents. One teen, formerly incarcerated, designing a job-matching app for second chances. One immigrant founder, coding from a laundromat's Wi-Fi every night. They weren't safe bets. They weren't warm intros. They were Elijah's. All of them, and for the first time someone opened the door without asking them to prove they were worthy first. One night, after a long session, Elijah stayed back in the Access office. The whiteboard was covered in ideas, post-its, milestones, dreams. Richard walked in quietly. He looked around. You ever think about how far this is from where we started? He asked. Elijah chuckled. I think about it every day. Richard hesitated, then said softly, You didn't just forgive me. You gave me the chance to do something better. That changed me. Elijah nodded. I didn't build this for revenge, he said. I built it so none of us would have to be lucky to be seen, because that's what it came down to. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about making sure no one else had to fight that hard just to be allowed in the room. 16 months after the first beta went live, Pulse got the call. A global productivity platform, with over 20 million users, wanted to acquire them, not partner. Their CEO called Elijah personally. You've built something brilliant, he said. Let us take it worldwide. The offer, $85 million, upfront, clean, life-changing. Elijah sat there, phone in hand, heart steady, not excited, not shocked, just quiet. This was what every founder dreamed of, right? The exit, the validation, the you made it moment. But deep down, something felt off. So he did what he always did when things didn't sit right. He asked questions. He called a meeting with the board. The exec team, the early hires, Richard, Lena, Miguel. They walked through the deal terms, the upside, the risks, the non-compete clause. Then came the last slide. Team restructure plan, post-acquisition. Elijah paused, scrolled slowly. Half. The access program? Cut, free tier features? Gone. The community forums, the ones where developers from Nairobi to Detroit found help? Shut down. They weren't just buying Pulse. They were dissecting it, stripping it, polishing it into something shiny and soulless. Elijah looked around the table. Lena was biting her lip. Miguel stared at the numbers. Richard was already watching Elijah. He knew what was coming. That night, Elijah sat alone, just him, a glass of tea, and the offer letter, $85 million he could retire, fund other founders, disappear. But then he opened an email from a 17-year-old coder in Nigeria, a user of Pulse, a graduate of Access. Your story gave me the courage to launch my app, not because I thought I'd be rich, but because I finally believed I deserved to be in the room. Elijah read it twice, then closed the laptop and made his decision. The next morning, he walked into the office early, called the team in. He stood at the front of the small meeting room, same place he'd pitched Pulse to his co-founders first week, and he said, "I didn't build this to flip it. I built it to flip the system. We're not selling." Silence. Then Lena exhaled, tears in her eyes. Miguel grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." Even Richard smiled. "Real one. I've worked in companies that sold out," he said. "This is the first one I've worked for that's holding the line." They passed on the $85 million, but gained something worth more. Their mission, their momentum, their identity, and the story spread. Fast, startup rejects, multi-million-dollar offer to stay independent. Founder chooses integrity over exit. The platform that said no, so others could say yes. Pulse didn't get smaller after that. It got bigger, more users, more investors, more respect, because people aren't just looking for the most powerful platform anymore. They're looking for one that remembers why it was built. Elijah looked out over his team later that week. Different colors, accents, backgrounds, and all of them there because he didn't sell the story short, because he remembered what it was like to be left out of rooms, and promised he'd build one big enough for everyone. 3 years after Pulse launched, Elijah stood at the front of a sunlit classroom in Atlanta. Not a boardroom, not a tech expo, not a VC conference, a high school, with mismatched desks, cracked floors, and rows of students who looked just like he once did, wide-eyed, bright, waiting to be seen. He wasn't there to pitch, wasn't there to impress, he was there to return. "How many of you," he asked, "have been told you don't belong in tech?" Every hand in the room went up, some slow, some high, but every one of them. Elijah nodded. "Good," he said. "That means you're about to break something open." Laughter, but then silence, because they knew he meant it. After the session, one student, Jamal, stayed behind, shy, but curious. "Can I ask you something, sir?" "Of course," Elijah said. Jamal hesitated. "Do you ever stop feeling like you're behind?" Elijah smiled gently. "Not really," he said, "but you stop letting it define you." Jamal nodded, then added, "I want to build something, too, but I don't have anything." Elijah crouched down slightly, looking him in the eye. "You've got you, and that's the one thing they can't take or ignore. Start there." He slipped a small card into Jamal's hand. "Access, Cohort 5 applications. Now open a QR code. A chance." "That's your room," Elijah said. "Go kick the door open." Outside, Richard waited by the Pulse van, older now, but more alive than he'd ever been. He'd transitioned fully into the Access program, now mentoring young founders full-time. He waved as Elijah walked over. "Let me guess," Richard said. "Another kid smarter than us?" Elijah laughed. "Definitely." They sat on the van's bumper, watching students pour out of the building. "I still think about it, you know," Richard said quietly. "That interview, that version of me. I almost missed all this." Elijah looked at him. "But you didn't." Richard smiled. "No. Thanks to you." Elijah shook his head. "Thanks to you for being willing to change." They sat in silence for a while. Then Richard asked, "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had gotten the job that day?" Elijah thought for a moment, then looked out at the school, the kids, the future walking by them, and said, "I wouldn't have built this. A beat." And he, Elijah nodded toward Jamal in the distance, might never have believed he could either. That night, Elijah opened his journal. Same one from years ago. He flipped to the back, wrote one final line. "Sometimes the greatest rejection is the door that forces you to build your own." He closed the book, turned out the light, and slept. Without doubt, for the first time in weeks, because the work was far from done, but the legacy already alive. And it was only just beginning.